Hey everybody, this is Beth Durinsky from Odyssey Insurance and Investments, and you're listening to the podcast, Real Insurance Made Simple. As a working mom of young kids and a small business owner, I know firsthand life happens. So come along with me and learn how your insurance policies work when real life happens and you need them most. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Real Insurance Made Simple. I did take a little bit of a hiatus the past 2 weeks. A lot of stuff got really crazy and just wasn't able to get an episode recorded. But I hope you got to listen to two of the interviews we've done so far. First with Zach from Zip Bonds on how you can be essentially fully insured and bonded as a contractor or someone who goes out and does work for others, and how bonds work across the board. Well, a high-level overview of how they work. And then a wonderful episode with JC from Catalyst Insurance Group on what his take on being an advisor is and the importance of an advisor and how that differs from the rest of the industry and just purchasing a policy from anyone or going online and doing it, because there are so many additional benefits that you get from having an advisor work with you on your insurance in the same way you would have an accountant or a CPA help with your taxes and your payroll, or an attorney help you out with legal stuff. An advisor for insurance helps you navigate the confusing and sometimes frustrating world of insurance. So to hop back into this business series, we are going to be talking about a workers' compensation policy today. And some of the employers out there or small businesses out there may or may not be familiar with this. Again, this is going to be a high-level overview. It's not carrier or company specific. So if you have specific questions, we do encourage you to reach out to your local agent or even give us a call here at Odyssey Insurance and Investments. Anyways, what is a work comp policy? It is a policy that is designed to protect employees for injuries or sickness due to the workplace. It provides both a benefit to employees and to the employer or business owner. The benefit to the employees come in the form of making sure your medical treatment, any ongoing care, lost wages, and payment for disability or even death benefits are covered in the event that something happens on the job. So you get physically hurt on the job and you have to go to the hospital and the doctor to get whether a broken bone or a back injury, whatever it may be, you then get those expenses covered. And it is a benefit to the employer because it helps provide liability coverage for those work-related injuries and illnesses. So it does allow the employer to help avoid being sued for an employee's medical costs or lost wages. Again, as we said, it's for work injuries and work illnesses. So an injury would be like a trip and fall, like we use in a lot of our episodes, but the employee breaks their leg or their arm and physically gets hurt. So the work comp would essentially pay like the hospital bill and pay any appointments for like follow-up physical therapy or potentially even lost wages. The work illness would be due to a sickness from a harmful chemical or like an allergen that the employee was exposed to on the job. So something in the air or a chemical that they had to touch created a sickness for that employee. And then the work comp policy would kick in to cover, again, medical treatment, ongoing care, lost wages, disability, and death. When I say death, it essentially means like funeral costs. For the small business owners and employers listening to this, it's important to know that work comp is more than just paying those expenses out for your employees. It actually has 3 separate parts and can be a little intricate, for lack of a better word. It's a little more in-depth or somewhat, I guess, confusing than what people anticipate it to be. We hear work comp, we hear, oh, that pays for employees if they get hurt. And that's kind of like the surface level that everyone expects of. There's part 1, part 2, and part 3. And again, this is in general. Please reach out to your local agent for more carrier or policy specific information. But part 1 is the coverage for the employees for those workplace injuries or sicknesses. There's essentially no policy limits associated with this part of the policy. Part 2 is the employer liability limits that, as the employer, you usually see on your work comp policy deck page. And they're broken down by per accident, per policy, and per employee. The base coverages out there are typically like $100,000 per accident, $500,000 per policy, and $100,000 per employee. I like to do at least $500,000, $500,000, $500,000. So $500,000 per accident, $500,000 per policy, and up to $500,000 per employee. And if you're confused on how those limits work, we're not going to get into it here, but call your local agent on what like the per accident, per policy, and per employee definition looks like. All of that to say that this part 2 is, again, employer liability limits. This is actually a pretty small portion of the work comp policy, and it is there in the event that a suit is brought against the employer for negligence in the workplace. It is more commonly found in the example I'm getting ready to give, but again, it's rare and it's a small portion of the work comp policy. But say an employee sues someone involved, usually like a third party, for negligence, and then that third party then in turn sues the employer for that. So that is part 2 of the work comp. And then part 3 is in what state does the work comp policy apply? Like, where are you purchasing it from? Where do you work from? Where is the business house? And then what other states will it extend to? There are a few states left in the United States, and I'm going off memory here. It's not in my notes. It's called a monopolistic state, which means they have weird carve-outs for work comp. For those people listening who are local to our area and the tri-state area, Ohio is one of these states. So it does depend how many days in a row you work in Ohio. For example, if your business is based in Indiana, you primarily do all your work in Indiana, but occasionally you cross the border into like Cincinnati, but you do a job for like 4 or 5 days. You're not a long-term employer or resident in Ohio. So a lot of times Ohio doesn't require you to meet their work comp needs. Again, this is a high-level overview, just to be having that conversation about how your work comp policy covers you, what area are you working in, what states are you going into, just to have a more in-depth, better conversation with your agent and something to think about. Each state does have its own requirements, kind of like what I just suggested to with Ohio. Because we are in Indiana and I primarily work with businesses in the Indiana area, we're going to focus on that one. For example, Indiana requires anyone who has employees to require workers' compensation by Indiana state law. If you don't, you can be fined. There are exceptions to that rule, though, and you typically have to go ask your agent or go look up the information for the state of Indiana. But for example, this is just one example. There are a handful of others out there. Farmhands are not required to have work comp carried on them. So a farmer who hires a farmhand is actually excluded from the requirement of carrying work comp, as just one example. But in theory, if you have employees, you should have a work comp policy per general and the majority of state guidelines. Look at your state specifically to get that specific information. The final portion of a work comp policy that we're going to touch base on today is how premium is determined for a workers' compensation policy. There are 2 main things that really come into play that help determine how much a company is going to charge you for that work comp policy. And that is your payroll. And the payroll helps guide the exposure. The larger the payroll, the more jobs you're doing, the bigger your business is. And payroll just helps give them a guide as to how many hours the employees are working and things of that nature. So your payroll and the type of work you're doing for the industry that you are working in. And the best example I can get for this is, say, two separate businesses. One is a tree cutting business and one, we'll say, is an insurance office with desk work. They both have a $60,000 payroll. That tree cutting business is going to be charged much higher for that same $60,000 payroll that the insurance office has, because the risk of getting hurt when you're cutting trees, that you could fall out of a tree, is much higher than someone who may get hurt working at any type of office administrative job where their main duties are to sit behind a desk and type. So just something to keep in mind. It is based off payroll and the type of work being done for your particular industry and job specifically. Another important factor that does come into play for the premium is essentially like a claims history. It's called an experience mod, and that's how they rate the overall experience of the business, the history that you have for your work comp, how long your work comp has been in place, claims, again, the type of jobs you're doing. So, and that is determined by, again, the history from the work comp policy. Again, this is just a general overview of how a work comp policy works, specifically tailored for small business owners or large business owners, anyone who has employees, and they need to review that option. We want you to use this information as a jumping off point to have a conversation with your local agent. That is all it is. It is meant to be informative. If you have questions or would like us to review your work comp policy, we would love to help you do that. Please give us a call at 812-932-2200. Otherwise, have a blessed day. Thank you all for listening today. We hope you found this episode helpful and informative as you navigate the world of insurance. As a reminder, this podcast is never for legal or professional advice, and you should always consult your local and licensed insurance professional. We wish you a week filled with love and blessings from the team at Odyssey Insurance and Investment.